Welcome to our deep dive on clear thinking.
Ooh, fun.
Today we're exploring Rolf Dobelli's The Art of Thinking Clearly.
Okay.
It's a fascinating look at those pesky mental traps,
Yeah.
we call them cognitive biases,
Right.
that can really trip us up even when we think we're being super sharp.
For sure.
In fact, the book's intro reminded me of this time I was at a gathering full of these incredibly brilliant people.
Okay.
I was feeling a bit out of my depth.
Oh, no.
And to my horror, someone actually mistook me for an expert on David Hume.
Oh, my gosh.
This experience got me thinking about survivorship biases, which Dobelli highlights in the book.
Right.
We often focus on the winners, like published authors or successful CEOs,
Mm-hmm.
and forget about all those who tried and didn't quite make it.
Yeah.
Have you ever chosen a career path based on the success stories of a few outliers?
So easy to do.
Understanding survivorship bias can help you make more informed decisions.
Definitely.
Not just about your career, but about investments, relationships, and so much more.
That's so true. It's true. Survivorship bias really distorts our perception of reality.
Yeah.
Take Harvard's reputation.
Okay.
Does it attract the best students because it's an amazing school? Or is it amazing simply because it recruits the brightest minds?
That's a good point.
The same goes for those tempting MBA income statistics.
Yay.
They only tell part of the story.
Yeah.
Think about it. What success stories have you fallen for?
Yeah.
What hidden failures might be lurking beneath the surface?
It's a real eye-opener.
It is.
This deep dive is all about giving you the tools to recognize these biases,
Yes.
so you can navigate the world with a clearer perspective.
Exactly.
Now let's unpack another bias Dobelli tackles.
Okay.
The swimmer's body illusion.
Right.
It's the idea that we often mistake selection factors for results.
Interesting.
It's like seeing those incredibly fit swimmers and thinking, if I swim, I'll get a body like that. But as Dobelli points out, it's the other way around. People with certain body types are naturally drawn to certain activities.
Exactly. It's about understanding the underlying factors at play,
Yes.
not just the visible outcome.
Okay.
Think about beauty ads promising miraculous results. Are they highlighting the selection factors?
Yeah.
Or are they preying on our desires for a specific result without acknowledging things like genetics or lifestyle?
It's all about the marketing. This connects directly to those who believe going to business school guarantees wealth.
For sure.
Dobelli argues that the people drawn to MBAs might already possess traits that set them up for financial success,
Right.
regardless of the degree itself. It's like those swimmers.
Yeah.
Certain individuals are predisposed to certain paths.
Precisely. Well, an MBA can be valuable. Consider what truly motivates you.
Mm-hmm.
Are you chasing a bigger paycheck, or are you drawn to the learning experience?
Good question.
Don't let the swimmer's body illusion lead you to decisions that aren't right for you.
Let's shift gears and talk about social proof.
Okay.
This one is all about how we're influenced by the crowd, especially when we're uncertain.
Mm-hmm.
Like choosing a restaurant in a new city. If it's packed, it must be good, right?
Right. It's a powerful instinct and one that had a survival advantage in our evolutionary past.
Yeah.
If everyone else was running from danger,
Right.
it was probably a good idea to follow suit.
Mm-hmm.
But today it could be a double-edged sword.
For sure.
Think about those viral social media trends or panic buying sprees.
Yeah.
Sometimes the crowd isn't always right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Speaking of questionable decisions, let's talk about the sunk cost fallacy.
Okay.
We've all been there.
Oh, yeah.
Dobelli shares a story about a friend stuck in a terrible relationship.
Oh, no.
His girlfriend kept cheating on him, but he refused to break up because he had invested so much in the relationship.
Oh, wow. The key takeaway here is this. Sunk costs are irrelevant to future decisions.
Okay.
Just because you've spent time, money, or energy on something. That doesn't mean you should keep throwing more resources at it if it's clearly not working.
So how can you apply this to your own life?
Good question.
It's about recognizing when the sunk cost fallacy is clouding your judgment,
Yeah.
whether it's a failing project, a bad investment,
Right.
or even a friendship that's run its course.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be afraid to cut your losses and move on.
For sure.
Now let's dive into one of the most influential biases,
Okay.
confirmation biases.
Right.
Dolly calls this one the father of all fallacies,
Wow.
arguing that it's at the root of many stubborn opinions and beliefs.
Interesting.
It's our tendency to seek out and favor information that confirms our existing beliefs, conveniently ignoring anything that contradicts them.
Right. And what's fascinating is how unconsciously this happens,
Yeah.
making it even more insidious.
Right.
It explains how people with wildly different worldviews can look at the same evidence and come to completely opposite conclusions.
Interesting.
They're simply filtering information to fit their pre-existing narratives.
So if you believe people are inherently good, you'll find evidence to support that every day, even if there are plenty of examples of, well, not so good people out there.
Yeah.
And of course, the same is true for the opposite belief.
Exactly. And this bias can be especially dangerous when it comes to politics or investing.
For sure.
It's crucial to actively seek out diverse perspectives and challenge your own assumptions.
Yeah.
Don't just live in an echo chamber of your own beliefs.
Dobelli connects confirmation bias to the story biases,
Okay.
which is our tendency to create narratives. Even when dealing with random or unrelated events, we crave order and meaning,
Right.
even if it means twisting the facts to fit our preferred storylines.
This can lead to some dangerous oversimplifications.
Yeah.
Think about those sensationalized news stories that reduce complex issues to easy-to-digest narratives. They might be compelling, but they often lack nuance and can be incredibly misleading.
So how can we fight this?
Good question.
Dobelli suggests being wary of anyone who presents information as a neat and tidy story.
Okay.
Always ask yourself,
Yeah.
what's the sender's agenda? What might they be leaving out?
Right.
This applies to everything from marketing to political speeches.
For sure.
Speaking of how information is presented, let's talk about the contrast effect.
Okay.
This one highlights how our perceptions are influenced by comparisons. Think about a product marked down from $100 to $70.
Okay.
It seems like a steal rate.
Yeah.
But a product that's always been $70 might be just as good, if not better.
Right.
The contrast distorts our judgment.
Marketers know this and exploit it all the time.
Yeah.
Think about those before and after photos or those limited time offers that create a sense of urgency. They're playing on our tendency to be swayed by comparisons rather than making an objective assessment.
Dobelli also argues that this contrast effect can make us misjudge investments.
Okay.
He says a share price is never low or high in itself.
Right.
It's all relative. What matters is whether it goes up or down from that point.
Exactly. Evaluate investments based on their intrinsic value,
Yeah.
not just their perceived changes in price.
Yeah.
Don't let market hype or fear dictate your decisions.
Let's move on to the availability biases.
Right.
This one is all about how the ease with which we can recall information can skew our judgments.
Okay.
Dobelli gives the example of doctors who favor certain treatments simply because those treatments come to mind readily.
Right.
They might be overlooking better options that they don't recall as easily.
It's about recognizing that easily recalled information might not be the most accurate or relevant. Think about sensational news stories.
Right.
They're memorable,
Yeah.
but don't always represent the full picture.
Dobelli also points out that this is why propaganda is so effective.
Interesting.
If something's repeated often enough, it starts to feel true, even if it's not.
Absolutely. It's especially relevant today with the constant bombardment of information.
Right.
Cultivating critical thinking is more important than ever.
For sure.
Question the information you consume and seek out diverse sources.
Now let's revisit the story biases.
Okay.
But this time, through the lens of how easily we fall for compelling narratives, even when they might be misleading.
Right.
Dobelli argues that good storytelling is the heart of advertising. We buy products we don't need because we're captivated by the narrative.
Our brains are wired for stories.
For sure.
We make sense of the world by weaving events into narratives.
Yeah.
The problem is that this often leads us to oversimplify complex issues and ignore crucial details.
Think about those charismatic leaders who win us over with their speeches.
Yeah.
We might be so enthralled by the story that we overlook their lack of substance or concrete plans.
Exactly. Demand evidence, scrutinize the details, and be wary of anyone who oversimplifies complex issues.
Right.
Don't just fall for a good story.
Dig deeper. Here's one we can all relate to. The hindsight bias. It's how we look back on events and think, of course it was obvious. Even if we were totally clueless beforehand.
Right.
Dobelli uses the example of Ronald Reagan's landslide victory over Jimmy Carter.
Okay.
After the fact, everyone claimed it was predictable, but in reality, the election was close.
The hindsight bias leads us to overestimate our own knowledge and predictive abilities.
Yeah.
We forget how uncertain we were in the moment and rewrite history to fit our current understanding.
So how do we avoid this trap?
Good question.
Dobelli suggests actively trying to remember our past predictions
Okay.
and compare them to what actually happened.
Yeah.
It helps us be more humble about our forecasting abilities.
I like that.
Now let's tackle
Right.
overconfidence. The tendency to overestimate our own abilities and knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Dobelli cites a study where people were asked to estimate things like the total egg production in the U.S.
Okay.
The results were shocking.
Really?
People were way off even when they were confident they were right.
And surprisingly, experts are even more susceptible to overconfidence than lay people.
Wow.
They often overestimate their knowledge in their fields,
Right.
which can lead to some pretty disastrous outcomes.
Dobelli describes asking students at top business schools about their career prospects.
Okay.
Most envision themselves on the boards of global companies,
Right.
even though the odds are astronomically small.
Being realistic about our limitations is key,
Yeah.
as is being open to the possibility that we might be wrong.
Let's move on to something called chauffeur knowledge.
Okay.
This refers to people who pretend to have deep knowledge,
Right.
but are simply parroting information they've picked up elsewhere.
Oh, interesting.
They're like chauffeurs who drive their bosses around, overhearing snippets of conversations, but
Yep.
not truly understanding the complexities of the business.
Chauffeur knowledge can be mistaken for true expertise.
Yeah.
They might use jargon or drop names,
Right.
but their understanding is superficial.
Hmm.
The ability to distinguish between genuine expertise and pseudo-knowledge is crucial.
For sure.
Look for people who can explain things clearly
Yeah.
and are open to different perspectives.
Speaking of expertise, Dobelli suggests we each identify our circle of competence.
Okay.
It's the area where our knowledge and intuition are truly reliable.
Interesting.
He uses the example of Warren Buffett, who is a master at analyzing companies and industries he thoroughly understands,
Right.
but doesn't venture outside of that.
Sticking to your circle of competence doesn't mean you can't learn and grow.
Okay.
It's about recognizing your limitations
Yeah.
and being cautious in areas where you lack expertise.
So true. Now onto the illusion of control.
Right.
Our tendency to overestimate our influence over events, even when we have very little control. Remember those closed-door buttons in elevators?
Yeah.
They often don't actually work,
I know.
but they give us the illusion of control.
Right. That illusion has evolutionary roots.
Yeah.
Having a sense of control over our environment increased our chances of survival.
Yeah.
But today, this bias can be problematic.
Think about those pedestrian crossing buttons
Right.
that sometimes don't actually affect the traffic light.
Yeah. And it can extend to more complex systems like the stock market.
Right.
We might believe we can predict market movements or control investment outcomes.
Yeah.
But countless factors are beyond our influence.
It all boils down to being realistic about our limitations
Sure.
and avoiding the trap of thinking we have more control than we actually do.
I agree.
Let's talk about the incentive super response tendency.
Okay.
This is about how strongly we respond to incentives, even in unexpected ways.
Interesting.
Dobelli uses the example of engineers in ancient Rome
Okay.
who had to stand under the bridges they built during opening ceremonies.
Oh, wow.
Talk about motivation to make sure your work was solid.
This principle goes beyond financial incentives.
Right.
Think about grades, social recognition, or even the promise of rewards in the afterlife.
Dobelli points out that people often respond to the incentive itself,
Yeah.
rather than the intended goal.
Right.
He gives the example of a company trying to reduce CEO salaries by making them public.
Interesting. The result? CEOs started comparing their salaries,
Oh, no.
demanding even higher pay to keep up with their peers.
Wow.
The incentive backfired.
So this means you need to be aware of the power of incentives and think carefully about potential unintended consequences before implementing them.
Right.
Now on to a more statistical concept, regression to the mean.
Okay.
This one's about how extreme events are usually followed by more average ones. A natural correction, if you will.
Right.
For instance, if a company has a record-breaking year,
Okay.
the next year is statistically likely to be less exceptional,
Quite correct.
simply due to the law of averages.
But we often fail to account for this regression.
Yeah.
We might blame a company's decline on poor management or credit a student's improved grades to a new teaching method
Right.
when it might just be a statistical fluctuation.
So how can we avoid misinterpreting data?
Good question.
Always consider the possibility of regression to the mean,
Okay.
especially when looking at extreme events or performances. Don't jump to conclusions.
Agreed.
Let's move on to outcome biases.
Right.
Our tendency to judge decisions based on their outcomes,
Uh-huh.
not the quality of the decision-making process.
Interesting.
Imagine 3 surgeons, each performing 5 high-risk operations.
Okay.
Surgeon A has 0 deaths, Surgeon B has 1,
Hmm.
and Surgeon C has 2.
All right.
Most people would rate Surgeon A as the best.
But with such a small sample size, there might be no real difference in their skill levels.
That's a good point.
The outcome bias can lead us to reward lucky decisions
Yeah.
and punish unlucky ones.
Right.
Even if the process was sound in both cases, focus on the process, not just the results.
Okay, let's explore the paradox of choice.
Interesting.
This is about how having too many options can actually lead to decision paralysis
Uh-huh.
and less satisfaction.
Okay.
Dobelli shares a study where a supermarket offered 24 types of jam one day,
Okay.
allowing people to try and buy at a discount.
Right.
The next day, they offered only 6 flavors.
They sold 10 times more jam on the second day.
Wow.
Having more choices initially seems appealing,
Yeah.
but it can quickly become overwhelming.
Right.
We get bogged down trying to evaluate everything and either don't make a decision
Yeah.
or feel less satisfied with the one we make.
And Dobelli argues that this paradox applies to all sorts of decisions.
Right.
From choosing a partner to selecting a retirement plan.
Uh-huh.
Having too many options can make us miserable.
Find a balance between variety and simplicity.
Okay.
Narrow your options, set clear criteria, and trust your gut after you've done your due diligence.
Now let's discuss the liking biases.
Okay.
The idea that we're more easily influenced by people we like,
Yeah.
regardless of their argument's merits. Think about commercials featuring celebrities endorsing products.
Right.
They're playing on our natural tendency to be swayed by likability.
It's why techniques like mirroring are effective in sales.
Okay.
The salesperson subtly mimics the customer's behavior to build rapport and increase likability.
So be aware of the liking bias.
Yes.
And be critical of your own judgments. Don't let someone's charm or charisma cloud your assessment.
Agreed.
Let's move on to the endowment effect.
All right.
This is about how we overvalue things we own simply because they're ours.
Yeah.
Dobelli's friend bought a case of wine at a good price,
Okay.
but then refused to sell any of it,
Really?
even when offered twice what he paid.
The endowment effect isn't just about material possessions.
Right.
It can apply to ideas, beliefs,
Yeah.
and even relationships.
Okay.
We become attached to the familiar and overestimate its value,
Right.
making it hard to let go.
This is why companies are so reluctant to abandon failing projects. They've invested so much,
Right.
they can't admit defeat.
Be willing to detach yourself from your possessions and evaluate their true worth objectively. Don't be afraid to let go of things that no longer serve you,
Okay.
even if you've become attached.
Now, for something a bit mind-bending,
Okay.
coincidence.
Got
We
it.
tend to overestimate the significance of coincidences,
Yeah.
seeing patterns and meaning where there might be none.
Right.
Dobelli describes a church choir in Nebraska
Okay.
where all 15 members were miraculously late for rehearsal,
Wow.
and the church exploded shortly after their scheduled start time.
Oh my gosh. The choir members saw it as a sign from God.
Right.
Statistically speaking, it was an improbable
Yeah.
yet possible coincidence.
Our brains are wired to look for patterns,
Right.
even in random events.
Yeah.
This can lead to superstitions and conspiracy theories.
Be skeptical of seemingly meaningful coincidences and remember the statistical realities.
Okay, let's talk about groupthink, where the desire for harmony in a group can lead to bad decisions.
All right.
The Bay of Pigs invasion is a classic example.
Okay.
President Kennedy and his advisors were so sure of their plan's success that they ignored warnings and dissenting opinions, leading to disaster.
Groupthink can impact even the most intelligent people.
Yeah.
The pressure to conform,
Right.
the fear of rocking the boat, and the illusion of unanimity
Yeah.
can squash critical thinking.
How do we avoid this?
Good question.
Dobelli suggests encouraging dissent,
Okay.
appointing devil's advocates, and seeking outside perspectives.
Yeah.
Leaders need to be open to criticism
Right.
and avoid expressing their own opinions too strongly at the outset.
Let's talk about neglect of probability.
Okay.
How we overestimate the likelihood of unlikely events and underestimate likely ones.
Dobelli mentions a study where people were told they'd receive an electric shock.
Okay.
One group was told there was a 50% chance,
Uh-huh.
the other a 5% chance. Both groups exhibited the same anxiety level.
Our brains don't intuitively grasp probabilities.
Yeah.
We focus on the potential impact, not the likelihood.
Right.
This can lead to irrational decisions like buying lottery tickets or panicking over insignificant risks.
So educate yourself about probabilities.
Right.
Consider both the likelihood and the impact of an event before making decisions.
I agree.
Let's explore the zero-risk biases, our irrational preference for eliminating risk entirely,
Wow.
even when it's not the most rational choice.
Interesting.
Imagine two methods for treating drinking water.
Okay.
Method A reduces the risk of dying from contaminated water from 5% to 2%.
Right.
Method B reduces it from 1% to 0%.
Most people would choose method B,
Really?
even though A saves 3 times as many lives.
Wow.
We fixate on achieving zero risk,
Yeah.
even if we overlook more effective solutions.
This bias can lead us to overspend on insurance
Right.
or avoid potentially beneficial activities.
Remember, zero risk is often an illusion. Be willing to accept small risks when the benefits outweigh the costs.
Let's talk about the scarcity error.
Okay.
This is how we tend to overvalue things that are scarce or hard to get. Dobelli shares a story of a real estate agent
Right.
who uses a clever tactic when a buyer is hesitant.
Oh, okay.
She mentions a fictional doctor from London who loved the property.
This tactic creates a sense of scarcity.
Right.
The opportunity seems to be slipping away.
And this scarcity error is exploited all the time in marketing.
Think about limited time offers or exclusive deals.
Yeah.
They play on our tendency to overvalue what's scarce.
This bias can lead us to make irrational choices.
Right.
Like staying in a bad relationship or overpaying for a collectible simply because it's rare.
Recognize the scarcity error and be willing to walk away from deals or opportunities that seem too good to be true.
Yeah.
Don't let FOMO cloud your judgment.
Now let's move on to base rate neglect.
Okay.
How we ignore statistical base rates when making judgments. Imagine guessing a wine's origin at a restaurant
All right.
where 75% of the wines are French.
If you're not a wine expert, the most rational guess is French.
Right.
Even if you think it has a different twist,
Yeah.
you're going with the statistical odds.
But we often neglect these base rates and focus on irrelevant details or anecdotal evidence.
This can lead to faulty judgments.
Yeah.
We might overestimate the likelihood of success in a career just because we know a few successful people in that field without considering the overall success rate.
Always consider base rates when making judgments.
Right.
Especially when dealing with probabilities.
Yeah.
Don't let personal biases override statistics.
Agreed.
Now let's talk about the gambler's fallacy.
Okay.
The idea that past events can influence future probabilities in independent systems. Have you ever invested in a stock just because it seemed due for a rebound?
Dobelli tells the story of a roulette table in Monte Carlo,
Okay.
where the ball landed on black 26 times in a row.
Oh, wow.
The crowd, convinced red was due,
Yeah.
bet heavily and lost a fortune.
Oh, no.
Each spin was independent of the last.
Right.
The odds reset every time.
We might assume a streak of bad luck must be followed by good luck, but that's not always the case.
Right.
Don't let the illusion of patterns or due dates cloud your judgment.
Let's discuss the anchoring bias.
Okay.
How we latch on to the first piece of information we receive, even if it's irrelevant.
Interesting.
Dobelli tells a story about a professor
Okay.
who asked students to write down the last 2 digits of their social security number.
All right.
He then asked them if they'd pay that amount for a bottle of wine.
Interesting.
Students with higher numbers bid significantly more.
Wow.
Those random digits acted as an anchor,
Yeah.
influencing their willingness to pay.
This bias affects everything from negotiating salaries to buying real estate.
For sure.
We fixate on that first number.
So be aware of the anchoring bias.
Okay.
Seek multiple sources of information before deciding.
Let's talk about induction.
Right.
This is about drawing general conclusions from limited observations, even when those observations might not be representative.
Interesting.
Think about a turkey fed every day for a year.
It might inductively conclude it will always be fed,
Right.
right up until the day before Thanksgiving.
We might assume a company's stock will keep rising because it's been doing well.
Right.
Or that a friend is always reliable because they've helped us out a few times.
Be careful about making sweeping conclusions based on limited data.
Okay.
Look for broader trends
Yeah.
and consider other explanations. Your assumptions might be wrong.
Now let's discuss loss aversion.
Right.
How we feel the pain of a loss more intensely than the pleasure of an equivalent gain.
Okay.
Think about what it would take to bring you to a perfect 10 on a happiness scale.
Okay.
Now imagine what would bring you down the same number of points.
It's likely something much more drastic.
Yeah.
This asymmetry in our emotional response can lead to irrational behavior. We might cling to losing investments or avoid risks with potentially large gains simply because we're afraid of the downside.
Make decisions based on a rational assessment of risks and rewards,
Yeah,
not just your emotional reactions.
I agree.
Let's move on to social loafing,
Yeah,
which is how our effort tends to decrease when working in a group.
right.
Imagine a rope pulling contest.
People pulling individually exert maximum effort,
Yeah.
but when pulling as a group, their contributions decline.
This happens because our contributions feel less significant in a group,
Right.
and we might be tempted to let others do the work.
To combat this, clearly define individual roles,
Okay.
make contributions identifiable,
Yeah.
and foster team spirit.
Let's explore the exponential growth biases,
Right.
how we underestimate the power of exponential growth.
Okay.
Imagine a sheet of paper folded in half repeatedly.
After 50 folds it,
Yeah.
would be as thick as the distance between the Earth and the Sun.
Wow.
Right.
That's hard to imagine.
It is.
This bias can lead us to underestimate the long-term consequences of things like compound interest.
Right.
We might focus on small initial gains and miss the explosive potential down the line.
So educate yourself about exponential growth and take a long-term perspective when making decisions,
Okay.
especially financial ones.
Now, for a bias that can lead to some bad financial decisions, the winner's curse.
Right.
The winner of an auction often ends up overpaying.
Oh, yeah.
Think about oil field auctions in Texas in the 1950s.
Multiple companies would bid on a piece of land.
Yeah.
And the highest bidder would often end up overpaying,
Right.
leading to financial difficulties.
This happens because of the uncertainty in options.
Right.
The winning bidder is often the most optimistic,
Uh-huh.
meaning they're more likely to overestimate the value.
So be aware of the winner's curse,
Okay.
set a strict maximum price, and walk away if the bidding gets too high.
Let's delve into the fundamental attribution error.
Okay.
Our tendency to overemphasize personality-based explanations for behavior.
And underestimate situational factors.
Right.
For example, if a CEO is forced to step down due to poor company performance,
Right.
we might assume they were incompetent
Yeah.
without considering external factors like a recession.
We're wired to focus on individuals as the agents of action, overlooking the complex web of influences that shape behavior.
So be mindful of the situation
Right.
and consider alternative explanations for behavior.
Yeah.
Don't jump to conclusions about someone's character
Right.
without taking context into account.
I agree.
Next up is false causality.
Okay.
The mistake of assuming correlation equals causation.
Yeah, we see that one all the time.
Dobelli uses the example of head lice in the Hebrides Islands.
People observed that sick people often had head lice.
Right.
And that when the lice left, the person recovered.
Okay.
They concluded the lice caused the illness,
Oh, wow.
when in reality, the lice left because of the person's fever.
So they had it backward.
Exactly.
Our brains look for patterns.
Even when dealing with random events.
Be skeptical of easy causal explanations.
Right.
And look for rigorous evidence
Yes.
before drawing conclusions.
Okay.
Correlation doesn't equal causation.
Now let's talk about the halo effect.
Right.
How a single positive trait can influence our overall impression.
Interesting.
Cisco Systems, a Silicon Valley darling,
Okay.
was praised for its brilliant strategy and charismatic CEO.
When the dot-com bubble burst,
Yeah.
the same company was criticized for its flawed strategy and uninspiring leadership.
So it was the same company.
Exactly.
Only the perception shifted,
Right.
not the company itself.
The Halo effect works both ways.
Okay.
A single negative trait can taint our entire perception.
Interesting.
It's like judging a book by its cover.
Yeah.
Separate your judgments of individual traits from your overall impression.
Right.
If you're interviewing job candidates,
Yeah.
assess skills and experience objectively,
Okay.
rather than letting charisma sway you.
Let's move on to alternative paths, a concept that challenges linear thinking and highlights the role of chance in our lives.
Okay.
Imagine playing Russian roulette with an oligarch for $10 million.
Even if you win,
Yeah.
that success comes with a huge asterisk.
Yeah.
The alternative paths could have easily led to ruin.
We often forget to consider those paths when evaluating success.
Right.
We might attribute someone's wealth solely to brilliance without acknowledging luck's role.
Remember, life is full of alternative paths, and our current reality is just one possible outcome.
Let's talk about the forecast illusion.
Okay.
How easily we fall for predictions.
Well,
Even though experts are often terrible at forecasting,
yeah.
a study analyzed over 28,000 predictions from self-proclaimed experts.
Wow.
Their accuracy was barely better than random chance.
The media often promotes these so-called experts,
Yeah.
and we're drawn to the allure of certainty,
Right.
even if it's an illusion.
When encountering a prediction, ask,
Good question.
what's the expert's incentive? And what's their track record?
Now, the conjunction fallacy,
Okay.
where we assume specific conditions are more likely than general ones.
Interesting.
Imagine a guy named Chris, 35, passionate about developing countries.
Right.
Which is more likely?
Mm-hmm.
A, Chris works for a bank, or B, Chris works for a bank and runs its third world foundation.
I'd probably say B.
Most people would choose B.
Yeah.
But A is actually more likely because it's a broader category.
Oh, I see.
We get seduced by the details and miss the statistical reality.
So simpler is more likely.
Right.
Okay.
Specific conditions are always less likely than general ones.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that when you're making judgments, especially about investing or risk assessment.
Let's discuss framing.
Right.
How the presentation of information can dramatically influence our perceptions.
Interesting.
Saying, hey, the trash can is full.
Okay.
We'll likely get a different response than, it would be great if you could empty the trash, honey.
Right. Marketers and politicians exploit framing all the time. Think about how a product is advertised as 99% fat-free versus 1% fat.
Right. Try to reframe information yourself.
Yeah.
Consider alternative perspectives and focus on the facts, not just the presentation.
I like that.
Let's discuss action bias.
Okay.
Our tendency to favor action over inaction,
Mm-hmm.
even when doing nothing is better.
Right.
Think about young police officers eager to make an arrest,
Okay.
even when it's not warranted.
They mistake activity for effectiveness.
Right.
Managers might launch new initiatives simply to appear decisive,
Yeah.
even if they're not strategically sound.
So sometimes it's better to wait.
Yeah.
Cultivate patience, resist the urge to jump in,
All right.
and carefully consider the potential downsides of action before taking the plunge.
Let's move on to omission bias.
Okay.
How we often feel less guilty about harms caused by inaction than by action.
Okay.
Think about parents who choose not to vaccinate their children.
All right.
If the child gets sick, the parents might feel less responsible than if they had actively caused harm.
That's a tough one.
It is.
This bias can lead to ethical dilemmas.
Yeah.
We might feel less guilty about environmental damage caused by inaction than by our direct actions, even though the consequences are the same.
Remember that inaction can have significant consequences.
Yeah.
And hold yourself accountable for the choices you make or don't make.
Let's discuss the self-serving biases.
Okay.
How we tend to attribute success to our abilities and failures to external factors.
Right.
A study gave participants a personality test
Yeah.
and then randomly assigned good or bad scores.
Those who received high scores thought the test was accurate,
Yeah.
while those with low scores dismissed it as worthless.
So it was all about ego.
Exactly.
We love to take credit for wins,
Right.
but blame others when things go wrong.
Be honest about your strengths and weaknesses and take responsibility for your actions.
Let's talk about the hedonic treadmill.
Okay.
How we tend to adapt to both positive and negative changes. Returning to a baseline level of happiness fairly quickly.
Right.
Research on lottery winners shows they experience an initial surge of joy,
Okay.
but return to their previous happiness level after a few months.
The same goes for negative events.
Yeah.
We adapt and move on.
This explains why possessions or achievements rarely bring lasting happiness.
Yeah, they don't
Right.
find joy in the journey.
Okay.
Cultivate meaningful relationships and pursue intrinsically satisfying activities, not just external rewards.
Now, let's explore the association biases.
Right?
How we link unrelated things based on past experiences.
Interesting.
Think about Pavlov's dogs.
Okay.
They learn to associate a bell with food.
Right.
We develop these associations all the time,
Yeah.
and they can influence us powerfully.
We might associate the bearer of bad news with the news itself,
Yeah.
leading to shoot the messenger syndrome.
So separate the message from the messenger
Right.
and avoid making snap judgments
Yeah.
based on emotional association.
Right.
Let's discuss the beginner's luck biases, how we often misinterpret early success as skill, leading to overconfidence.
Think about those who made a killing in the dot-com bubble.
Okay.
They weren't successful because of stock picking abilities,
Right.
but because the market was rising.
It was a rising tide.
Exactly.
They mistook luck for skill
Yeah.
and lost big when the bubble burst.
Be humble about success.
Okay.
Acknowledge the role of chance.
Yeah.
And avoid extrapolating from limited data.
Now let's talk about cognitive dissonance.
All right.
How we try to rationalize our actions and beliefs, even when they're inconsistent.
Okay.
Think about the fable of the fox,
Okay.
who tries to reach some grapes, but can't jump high enough.
To reduce dissonance.
Right.
He convinces himself that grapes were sour anyway.
We might buy something we don't need,
Yeah.
and then convince ourselves it was a good purchase.
Exactly.
Or we might hold on to a belief, even after it's disproven.
Be honest with yourself. Yeah. Admit when you're wrong, and seek information that challenges your beliefs.
Let's dive into hyperbolic discounting.
Right.
How we overvalue immediate rewards and undervalue future ones.
Okay.
Would you rather have $100 in a year or $110 in 13 months?
Now, would you rather have $100 today or $110 in a month?
It's the same difference.
Right.
But the time frame changes things.
Exactly.
Most would choose $110 in both cases, but the introduction of now makes $100 more tempting in the second scenario.
Yeah.
Even though it's the same $10 difference.
Our emotional interest rate skyrockets when a reward is immediate.
I see.
This can derail our long-term goals.
Yeah.
And make us vulnerable to get-rich-quick schemes.
So be patient.
Yes.
Cultivate patience, consider future consequences, and resist instant gratification.
Let's talk about because justification.
Okay.
How easily flimsy justifications persuade us.
Right.
Imagine a traffic jam due to road repairs.
Okay.
You might be less frustrated.
Yeah.
If the sign reads, "We're renovating the highway for you,"
Right.
even though the reason is obvious, the because makes the inconvenience more palatable.
So it's all about how it's framed.
Exactly.
This works everywhere.
Right.
We might agree to a favor because someone provides a reason, even a weak one.
Yeah.
Or we might buy a product based on a flimsy marketing claim that includes because.
Be aware of this and demand strong justifications.
Now let's discuss decision fatigue.
All right.
How making too many decisions depletes our mental energy.
Yeah, we all know that feeling.
Imagine a high-stakes presentation
Okay.
where everything hinges on the CEO's approval.
You're offered 3 time slots.
Right.
Morning, midday, or evening.
This seemingly minor decision can feel overwhelming when you're mentally exhausted.
Research shows judges are more likely to grant parole in the morning than later in the day.
Wow. So it really does have an impact.
It does. Yeah, it really does.
It's crazy how just the time of day can affect these big decisions.
It really is.
So what's the solution?
Well, Dobelli suggests
Okay.
minimizing the number of decisions you make each day,
Yeah, that makes sense.
particularly for unimportant tasks.
Right.
Automate routines.
Okay.
Create default choices and delegate whenever possible.
Yeah.
Save your mental energy for the big decisions.
Now, for a bias that might make you squirm a little,
Okay.
the contagion biases,
Right.
feeling disgust or aversion towards objects that have been in contact with something repulsive.
Interesting.
Imagine trying to sell a house once owned by a serial killer.
Even if it's been cleaned and renovated, buyers might feel a sense of contagion.
It's not always rational.
Right.
We might refuse to wear a sweater that belonged to a terrible dictator,
Yeah.
even though it poses no actual threat.
Recognize that this sense of contagion is often irrational.
Okay.
And try to focus on the facts, not just your emotional reactions.
Here's a statistical concept that's often misunderstood.
Okay.
The problem with averages can be misleading when dealing with data skewed by extreme values.
Interesting.
Think about calculating the average wealth of a group of people with modest assets.
Oh, yeah.
If you add a multi-billionaire to the mix,
Right.
the average skyrockets,
Yeah.
giving a distorted picture of the group's actual financial situation.
Exactly.
This applies to all sorts of data.
Right.
The average lifespan has been increasing, but that doesn't mean everyone's living longer.
Right.
It's influenced by a decline in infant mortality rates,
Yeah.
not an increase in maximum lifespan.
Look beyond averages and consider the data distribution. Don't let a single outlier skew your perception.
Let's discuss motivation crowding.
Great.
How external rewards can sometimes undermine intrinsic motivation.
Interesting.
Dobelli tells a story about a friend offering to help him move fragile antiques.
He was happy to do it out of friendship.
Right.
But when his friend sent him money as a thank you,
Yeah.
it felt transactional, not a gesture of goodwill.
So it kind of ruined it.
It did.
The external reward, the money, crowded out the intrinsic motivation to help.
Right. This can be a problem in areas like education or work,
Uh-huh.
If we're always focused on grades or bonuses,
Yeah.
we might lose sight of the joy of learning or the satisfaction of doing meaningful work.
It's about the love of it.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's important to foster intrinsic motivation,
Definitely.
praise effort, encourage curiosity,
Mhm.
and create an environment where people feel valued for their contributions.
I agree.
Let's talk about the twaddle tendency.
Okay.
Using fancy language or jargon to mask a lack of knowledge or sound authoritative
Right.
in a survey about why many Americans couldn't locate their country on a map.
Right.
One respondent said, I haven't really analyzed it, but I don't think the U.S. should be blamed.
Classic twile.
Right.
Using vague language to avoid admitting ignorance.
So they're just trying to sound smart.
Exactly.
This tendency is common in academia, politics,
Yeah.
and the corporate world.
About valuing clarity and honesty.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to admit when you don't know something.
Yeah.
And be wary of those who hide behind jargon.
Now, for a statistical concept, that might surprise you.
Okay.
The Will Rogers phenomenon,
Right?
moving something from one category to another,
Mm-hmm.
can improve the average of both,
Interesting.
even if nothing actually changes.
Okay.
Imagine a bank with two money managers.
Okay.
One handles a few ultra-wealthy individuals.
Okay.
The other manages wealthy but not exorbitantly rich clients.
To increase the average pool of money for both,
Okay.
simply move one wealthier client from the second manager to the first.
Interesting.
The averages go up,
Yeah.
even though the total amount of money hasn't changed.
That's counterintuitive.
It is.
This applies beyond finance.
Right.
In healthcare, moving patients from a sick to a healthy category can improve the average health of both, even if the patients haven't gotten better.
Look beyond superficial changes in averages and understand the data.
Okay.
Don't be fooled by statistical tricks.
Let's talk about the information biases.
Right.
Our tendency to seek information even when it's not useful for making a decision.
Interesting.
Think of a doctor ordering unnecessary tests
Okay.
to feel more confident in their diagnosis.
The tests might not change the treatment,
Right?
but the doctor feels better having more information.
So it's more about the doctor's feelings
Exactly.
than the patient's outcome.
Right.
This can lead to problems like procrastination and analysis paralysis.
For sure.
We get bogged down in researching every detail, even when it doesn't help us decide.
Recognize when enough is enough.
Yeah.
And focus on the information that's truly relevant.
Let's explore effort justification.
Okay.
The tendency to overvalue things we've put a lot of effort into.
Right.
Dobelli's friend endured painful hazing rituals
Oh, wow.
to earn a parachute pin.
Years later, he still treasures it.
Right.
Not for its inherent value,
Yeah.
but because of the effort it took to get it.
So it's fundamental.
Exactly.
This applies to relationships, DIY projects,
Yeah.
and even clinging to failing businesses.
Recognize that effort doesn't equal value.
Okay.
And be willing to let go of things that aren't serving you.
Let's discuss the law of small numbers.
All right.
Drawing conclusions from small samples,
Okay.
leading to faulty generalizations.
A retail company analyzing shoplifting might conclude that rural stores have higher theft rates.
Okay.
But if the rural stores are simply smaller,
Right.
a single incident has a greater impact on the overall rate.
We often forget to consider sample size.
Yeah.
This can lead to stereotyping or overestimating the effectiveness of new treatments.
All right.
Demand large sample sizes before drawing conclusions, and be wary of anecdotal evidence.
I agree.
Small samples are often not representative.
Now let's explore how expectations can influence our perceptions and experiences.
Okay.
Imagine a company announcing record-breaking profits,
Right.
but its stock price plummets
Why would that happen?
because the results didn't meet analysts' even higher expectations.
So even though there were good results, they weren't good enough.
Exactly. Our expectations become a reference point.
Okay.
If reality falls short,
Yeah,
we're disappointed, even if the outcome is objectively positive.
that's kind of depressing.
It is.
This can affect everything,
Uh-huh.
from how much we enjoy a movie to how we assess a job candidate.
Be aware of your expectations and
Yeah.
try to evaluate things objectively.
Sometimes we overthink things,
Yeah.
making them more complicated than necessary.
Right.
This is what Dobelli calls simple logic.
Okay.
Here's a classic example.
Right.
A bat and a ball cost $1.10.
Okay.
The bat costs $1 more than the ball.
Mm-hmm.
How much does the ball cost?
Most people would say 10 cents,
Right.
but it's actually 5 cents.
Yeah, I always get that one wrong.
It's easy to get tricked.
We get tripped up by assumptions.
Yeah.
and fail to apply basic logic.
This can affect decisions in finance, relationships, and other areas.
Let's just keep it simple.
Right. Sometimes the best approach is to step back, clear your mind,
Yeah.
and apply common sense.
Let's move on to the Forer effect.
Okay.
How easily we believe vague, flattering personality descriptions that could apply to anyone.
A study gave participants a supposedly personalized personality assessment,
Okay.
which was actually a generic list of positive traits.
Most rated it as accurate,
Right.
even though it was bogus.
We believe things that confirm our positive self-image.
I see.
This explains why we fall for horoscopes or personality tests.
Hmm?
We see ourselves in vague descriptions.
Be critical of flattering assessments.
Yes.
Demand specific evidence.
Mm-hmm.
And seek information that challenges your self-perception.
I like that.
Let's discuss volunteers' folly.
Okay.
Sometimes our good intentions to help can backfire.
Interesting. How so?
Imagine someone volunteering to build birdhouses for a local club.
While admirable, they might be taking work from a professional carpenter.
So it's better to leave it to the professionals.
Sometimes, in many cases, donating money is more effective.
Our time is valuable.
Yeah, it is.
Focus on your expertise and donate to organizations that align with your values.
Now let's talk about envy.
Okay?
That feeling of resentment or bitterness when others succeed or have what we desire.
It's a tough one.
It is. Envy is useless,
Yeah,
doesn't benefit us, and makes us miserable.
right.
It's rooted in a time when resources were scarce.
Mm-hmm.
But today, someone else's success doesn't detract from our own.
So how do we overcome it?
Good question. Focus on our goals.
Okay.
Cultivate gratitude
Yeah.
and celebrate other successes.
Just discuss the fairness bias.
There.
Our tendency to reject outcomes we perceive as unjust, even if they're in our best interest.
Okay.
Think about the ultimatum game,
Right.
where one person splits $100 with another.
If the second person rejects the offer,
Yeah.
neither gets any money.
So they both lose.
Right.
Logically, they should accept any offer.
They should.
But people often reject unfair offers,
Yeah.
even if it means losing out.
This fairness bias is ingrained in us
Yeah.
and is crucial for social cooperation.
Hmm.
We punish unfair behavior.
It highlights the fact that we're not always driven solely by rational self-interest.
Let's explore the illusion of attention.
Okay.
The idea that we overestimate our ability to notice what's happening around us.
Interesting.
Think about the famous gorilla experiment.
Oh, yeah. Seen that.
Participants watch a video of people passing a basketball,
Right.
counting passes made by one team.
Okay.
A person in a gorilla suit walks through the scene,
Yeah.
but many miss it.
Because they're so focused on the ball.
Exactly, or so focused on one thing that we miss the obvious.
Yeah.
This has implications for real life.
Right.
We might miss important details when multitasking or relying on technology.
Like when you're looking at your phone and you walk into something.
Exactly. Cultivate situational awareness
Yeah.
and be mindful of your limitations.
Let's talk about strategic misrepresentation.
Okay.
Presenting ourselves in a more favorable light,
Mm-hmm.
particularly in competitive situations.
Think of job interviews. Candidates embellish accomplishments
Yeah.
or downplay shortcomings.
Right.
It's natural to want to present your best self,
Mm-hmm.
but it's problematic when it becomes deceptive.
So how do you see through that?
Verify claims,
Okay.
check references,
Yeah.
and
No.
focus on past performance, not just promises.
Next up is the planning fallacy,
Right?
where we underestimate the time, cost, and risks of projects.
Think of major infrastructure projects.
Okay.
They'd consistently run over budget and behind schedule.
Because things always take longer than you think.
Exactly. We tend to be overly optimistic when planning, focusing on the best case scenario.
Dobelli suggests using reference class forecasting.
Okay.
Look at timelines and costs of similar projects
Right.
to create realistic estimates.
Yeah, that's a good approach.
Now for a bias with a fancy name,
Okay.
deformation professionnel,
Ooh,
how our expertise can blind us to other perspectives or solutions.
interesting.
Think of a hammer manufacturer
Okay.
who sees every problem as a nail.
We become accustomed to thinking within our professional framework.
Right.
This can be true for doctors, lawyers,
Yeah.
and executives.
Be aware of your professional blind spots.
Yes.
Seek diverse perspectives
Mhm.
and consider alternative approaches.
Let's discuss the illusion of skill,
Okay.
how we often overestimate our ability to control outcomes determined by chance.
Right. We often assume successful entrepreneurs
Hmm.
are successful solely due to talent and hard work.
But in many fields, success is a mix of skill and luck.
Right. Dobelli cites research on investment advisors
Okay.
whose performance over time was essentially random.
Exactly.
Be humble about your accomplishments,
Yes.
acknowledge luck,
Mm-hmm.
and avoid believing you have more control than you actually do.
Let's talk about the feature positive effect.
Right.
How we tend to focus on what's present rather than what's absent,
Okay.
leading to a skewed view of reality.
Think about Beethoven's Ninth Symphony.
Okay.
We're grateful for it.
But would we be less happy if it had never been composed?
I guess not.
Probably not, because we wouldn't know what we were missing.
We might focus on the potential downsides of a choice
Yeah.
without considering the upsides of alternatives.
Consider both what's present and what's absent when making decisions.
Okay.
Our perceptions can be skewed by what's most noticeable.
Let's discuss the fallacy of the single cause.
Right.
Oversimplifying complex events
Hmm.
by attributing them to a single cause.
Think of plane crashes.
Okay.
We might latch on to pilot error or bad weather as the cause,
Right.
when it was likely a combination of factors.
Yeah, it's usually a perfect storm of things.
Sure.
This bias can affect our understanding of political upheavals or economic crises.
Resist the urge to oversimplify. Embrace complexity.
Here's a more technical bias.
Okay.
The intention to treat error.
Right.
We misinterpret data by not accounting for people who drop out of studies or treatments.
Interesting.
Imagine a drug trial for heart disease.
Okay.
The drug seems effective for those who take it regularly, but those who are irregular have a higher mortality rate.
Mm-hmm.
However, the irregular group might include sicker people who stopped taking the drug because it wasn't working.
So it skews the data.
Right.
Analyze data based on the original groups.
Okay.
Even if some drop out, this applies to all sorts of research.
Let's end our exploration with the news illusion.
Okay.
Dobelli argues our news obsession
Uh-huh.
is harmful to our well-being and decision-making.
Interesting.
News is often negative, irrelevant, and a waste of time.
We're bombarded with information about events we can't control.
Right. What's the solution?
Drastically reduce news consumption and focus on meaningful activities.
Instead of scrolling headlines,
Right.
read books, have conversations,
Mhm.
spend time in nature, and pursue your passions.
That was quite a journey through common cognitive biases.
It was.
Hopefully you're starting to see the patterns and recognize these biases in your own thinking.
Yeah, I know I am.
Remember, the goal isn't to eliminate them entirely. That's impossible. The key is to be aware of them.
Yeah.
Challenge your assumptions and strive for clear thinking, especially when making important decisions.
Dobelli highlights the sweet spot between intuition and rational thinking.
Exactly. Sometimes trust your gut, especially for everyday decisions.
Yeah.
Save your mental energy for the big stuff.
Speaking of big stuff,
Yeah.
Dobelli encourages us to identify our circle of competence.
It's where your knowledge and experience are truly reliable.
Right.
It's where you can make intuitive decisions confidently.
Yeah.
For decisions outside that circle.
Mm-hmm.
Remember all those biases
Yeah.
and proceed with caution.
Excellent advice. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the art of thinking clearly.
It was my pleasure.
We hope you found it as enlightening as we did.
Me too.
Until next time,
Yeah,
keep those mental gears turning
for sure.
and be sure to dive deeper into Dobelli's book to explore even more fascinating insights.